And good afternoon, and I'd like to express our appreciation to the CCPA for allowing us to do a webinar presentation. I'm speaking on behalf of our group, which is Ted's on Chapel Center for Recovery. We're a small facility in New Brunswick, Canada. Um, we see clients from all over Canada with substance use disorders. And we've now entered our second year of operation. And to date, our results are outstanding. I'd like to acknowledge the other folks along with me on this, which is my partner of 15 years, Denise Duffy, as well as a couple of very bright young fellows, Dr. Liam Carey, who I've known for many years, and John Chisholm, who's just getting into his master's in counseling psychology. They've been a pivotal part of our success, and a lot of the discussions that I'm talking about today, I've shared within the group. So while I'm the only one speaking, I would like to say that I'm not alone on this venture. So I'll give a bit of background, how this all came into being. I personally have had experience in the recovery world since 1998. So actually over 23 years now. First as an unwitting, unplanned client, then became a peer member, did a little bit of group counseling years back, and then faded away from the recovery world for a little while, and then re-encountered it in our research consultancy, where much of what we'd get asked to look at for clients all across Canada were solutions to inpatient, meaning residential recovery, as well as population-based approaches to dealing with people, helping them with addictions. And one project that we did was really quite moving, because we'd thought for a long time that maybe we should be doing this ourselves, um, given the corporate knowledge. And we did a broad, including international, literature review of best practices in residential care for substance use disorder. And frankly, at the end of the project, which was for one of Canada's provincial governments, our conclusions were there really isn't that much out there in terms of at least published literature that would meet scientific rigor that actually showed much better outcomes of people actually going to residential care versus not going, or going to psychologists for care, or for going to 12-step groups. That we're still dealing at the 1-year point with, which is where the few studies that were conducted went to. At the 1-year point, the vast majority of people who had entered residential care, regardless of the type of format, had relapsed. So the statistics as well from, say, the match study of the early 2000s, again, showed potential benefit in residential care and support groups. Again, nothing really truly compelling. So after that, we decided that really we weren't going to jump into this and be more of the same, because my personal experience had been 12-step group based. And I personally was going through relapse after relapse. So to say that we found this the hard way, absolutely. In terms of trying everything under the sun, in terms of what's out there on recovering from addiction, nothing seemed to be working. And that we find to be pretty typical with many clients that we see at our center, that they've tried others, it's not working. Almost invariably, people try to quit on their own numerous times. That doesn't work. So really, until we had this epiphany, so to speak, um, we just weren't prepared to offer anything out of the ordinary. And I personally just find it too heartbreaking to see people get better and then crash 2, 3, 4 months later. That being said, the good news is I came up with an epiphany, which I quickly shared, that really became a potential game changer in terms of what evidence and what thinking was out there. Meaning, we know that there's a number of models of substance use disorder, or call it alcoholism, or call it addiction. But according to NIDA in the USA, it is called a chronic relapsing brain disease, characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite harmful consequences. And according to the American Society of Addiction Medicine, it is an inability to consistently abstain, impairment in behavioral control, diminished recognition of significant problems, and a dysfunctional emotional response. So, to me, it's little wonder that it's difficult to get people into treatment when really treatment is going to essentially condemn them to a lifelong struggle with a chronic relapsing brain disease, with hopes for remission and hope for sustained recovery, but it's always going to be there. And I know when I first came across it, when I got basically, we kid around, we say we went into rehab with a alcohol problem and came out with a disease. And that's really, really very typical of what happens. And so I'm going to talk a little further about what that viewpoint does, beyond the usual stigmatizing, um, giving people feelings of uh, occasional hopelessness, the fact that they are never going to be right. This is always going to be um, uh, the monkey on their back. Um, it can be unto itself um, a very strong factor in actually promoting relapse, just with holding on to this fixed idea that this was a chronic relapsing disease forever, that and could spring out at any point. And certainly, we've all seen the stories. I see I'm speaking to the correct audience, of the person who had those wonderful 10 years and then had a beer and then tore everything apart in 10 months. We've all heard of the multiple relapses to the point where it's very easy to fall into the general thinking that, yeah, this is a chronic relapsing brain disease, and no matter what we do, people are always going to be continuously relapsing. Um, I beg to differ on this entire concept, and we formed our center on the basis of something very different that is starting to percolate in academic centers. There's some education now going on within psychology and social work, but it truly hasn't hit the mainstream uh, rehabilitation industry in any great manner. So what I'm going to suggest um, as part of our hypothesis that is so far showing itself to be dramatically correct, um, and as well from the science of recovery, although there is very little of it. This is just emerging. The science of recovery, science of addiction itself has really only sorted itself over the last 10 years. Now that we seem to know what addiction is, now we're starting to see what the science of recovery is actually all about. And much of what recovery is based on, and here as well, is cognitive restructuring, which means uh, thinking differently, feeling differently, and having different behaviors, and eventually different beliefs. And so, if one thinks of, say, the 12-step program, um, and love the people, still would go to meetings now and then if I had the time. But part of the cognitive restructuring that goes on there is that this is forever, and that we have a daily reprieve. Now, that sort of restructuring can be pretty predictive of relapse. If you think that you have a person, you're speaking to them, they're going to say 100 meetings a year, which is not uncommon whatsoever, and they're hearing the same message again and again and again, then it's virtually impossible for it not to restructure your thinking to the point that if people do pick up, it will be full-blown relapse. And that another piece of this being that this is also something not to bother figuring it out, but to turn it over to a higher power or external force or someone trusting, making something outside of yourself as the source of your power to recover. Pretty powerful cognitive restructuring. Um, I mean, no criticisms of the program, other than I think it's time to have a look at something different within that framework. And again, you know, the general gold standards that are going on now in treatment, they'll include cognitive behavior therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. Again, focused on cognitive restructuring, but fundamentally, what are we telling people? What is the end goal? What is the belief? And the belief remains relapsing chronic forever. Let's make the best of it with some CBT and some DBT, and go from there. Um, Again, the match study of the early 2000s showed fairly minimal impact of CBT. That's not to say 20 years later it's not better. A recent study out of Harvard, very recent, by Dr. Kelly, is suggesting that there is a likelihood that this is helpful, which makes perfect sense to me. And in fact, in terms of what happens within our facility, there are some similarities to dialectical behavior therapy, but we don't practice any particular therapy whatsoever. Essentially, we are an education program that we provide information and support people in coming to conclusions about their own addiction that works for them. We're not, when I tell people, we're not here to change behaviors. We're here to get you off of substances for now and forever, and to give you back the choice whether or not you wish to start over again or to carry on. Couple super important points that differentiated us and differentiate us now. And the proposition really, and it became very personal for me, is what if the fundamental concept of addiction was flawed? There's just something not quite right. And for 15 plus years, I mean, I heard all the arguments. It's a disease, it's not a disease, it's a this, it's a that. But there was one certainty to the whole thing, which was it was a permanent. It meant no matter what, you would always walk with a limp or fly on one wing. And this was going to be to death. And to me, that is a concept that is just plain unpalatable and always was. Whether you wish to call addiction a disease or not, I mean, there's a whole bunch of definitions of disease. So, from my point of view, we don't preach that model at all. We know that it is a disorder of neural development, and that's what it is. And in fact, what if, and in fact, I've heard speeches from Dr. Kelly, again, one of my favorite professors of mine in the past, who has said very simply, the majority of people do recover. They do. It's over. So, what if people actually truly did recover from this horrendous experience of addiction and were able to frame it as a life experience rather than a life sentence? That would imply that there had to be fundamental cognitive restructuring, neuroadaptations to move away from the tendency to have this as a chronic state. And in fact, in terms of the epiphany, the proposition that gave rise to this was actually from my days back when in engineering physics, where we were talking about the transistor. And in addiction, I like to think of it that just a small idea in terms of, oh, maybe I'll have that drink, or maybe I'll pick up, somehow grows and overpowers all rational thinking. And, Alcoholics Anonymous describes this perfectly. I mean, their text is absolutely a fantastic piece of writing, incredibly descriptive, where Bill W. writes that for some reason, in a given moment, all memories of yesterday, last night, last week, last year's misery are forgotten, and the person drinks again. Somehow that small idea overpowers everything in terms of what has happened prior. And so I think about it that, okay, it is an idea. How could we represent that in terms of physics, say? And I think of the transistor amplifier, which, if you have a small current leading into it, as shown on the diagram at the emitter, that small current, depending on the inputs into it from the base, meaning different voltages, different currents, different inputs into the semiconductor part of the transistor, that small current will not only pass out into the collector, meaning moving down the line as an on-off switch, depending on what the substrate is and the inputs into that substrate, you get a magnification of that current. You get a tremendous amplification, just like that thought that, ooh, I think I'll have a drink. All of a sudden, over a very short time period, overwhelms. So I'm thinking, okay, this is like an amplifier, a transistor amplifier. So what if we were able to get control of the inputs through the base, and also were able to alter the semiconductor makeup? Then we would essentially have control over the switch. So control the inputs and the semiconductor substrate, and the power surge just doesn't fire. Essentially, pretty radical thinking, but that over time, that's the end of the so-called disease. That's the end of the problem. That's enough of this nonsense about chronic relapsing forever disease. If we do cognitive restructuring on the basis of this is chronic relapsing, hold on tight, then we are going to get exactly the results that we're trying to achieve. And that is continuous, with, periods of sobriety. So, to me, this is one of the dangers of actually going into a treatment center. One of, because there's many, the fact that people that rebel at the thought of the forever disease, really left with no solutions. Now what? As well as the people who do well, they're still, being told, as soon as you stop meetings, you're gonna relapse. Oy, oy. So, a number of people I've spoken to said one of the most frightening things they did, 5, 6 years into recovery, was stop going to meetings, thinking the roof is going to cave in. And it doesn't. And it doesn't for a reason. And we're going to get into that. Now, backing off, going back to the transistor amplifier, when I did more research into it and our team started looking into this further from a neuroscience perspective, it's pretty interesting. For instance, the dopamine reward pathway, which I'm sure the audience knows intimately well, from the VTA to the nucleus accumbens, is associated with that dopamine surge that causes the euphoria, pleasurable experience in people with addictions, substance use disorder, behavioral addictions, that the key is at the VTA to the nucleus accumbens, the mesolimbic pathway. That could be thought to be the switch in terms of our model. And in terms of magnification, does it happen? Speak to any addict about craving, and it is the motivation to use or to drink is unbelievably powerful, therefore incredibly magnified. And so it fits the generalities of a transistor amplifier. That being said, we're going to shift out of engineering physics and get into what I was pleased to discover was the newly emerging neuroscience of addiction. Go figure, 15 years of AA, and I heard nothing about it. Almost taboo to actually look inside your mind and figure it out. But in fact, in terms of our solutions, that's exactly what we think is the best process. In terms of people with addictions, are generally very intelligent people. They can take complex material, and if you show them a problem, they're likely to figure it out. And so in terms of how do you solve the problem of addiction, the answer to me finally became, well, show me what it is. Don't talk to me about what it is in terms of, spiritual this and that and the others. I need something concrete. That's just who I am. And lo and behold, the answer is in neuroscience as well, paired with behavioral psychology. Neuroscience on its own won't do it. We can't teach a neuroscience course and just assume that everyone's going to be over their addictions. If it doesn't pair with behavioral to give an understanding of where the thinking and behaviors are coming from and the whys, then it's not going to help. That's been our experience to date. So, and again, I'm going to, on the dopamine reward system, which a lot of researchers and clinicians will think that really the whole thing, the whole business of addiction centers around maladaptive, reward seeking, etc., all centered around this pathway. I agree, it's a really super important piece of the puzzle, but there's a lot of inputs that go into that from other sections of the brain that make that switch turn on involuntarily. and that is called addiction. It is totally within the subconscious. When people come in here in the doors, they simply have no idea why they can't stop. We know that addiction is complex. We know that. It's been around for a long time, and up until the recent diagnostics and diagnostic imaging came out on the brain, really weren't able to put any substance to it. But we have known for a long time that it is complex. Yes, it does affect behaviors. Sure, impulsivity to the max, risk taking, poor decision making, lack of uh, planning with consequences in mind, all kinds of stuff on top of the substance use itself. So we know it's a very complex disorder. What are we going to do about that? And I've seen all kinds of fancy diagrams in the literature that have a certain model of it. None of them particularly work for me, meaning I could barely understand them. Therefore, how am I going to help somebody else understand them? We came up with something that I believe is really, really helpful, going back to the very beginning, which is that one small idea overpowers all thinking. And how do you get there? What's that all about? From the neuron down just above my head, from the single neuron firing, at some point, enough of these will fire that you end up with the story above, which is the poor guy at the end of alcoholism, where that man needs that drink or he'll feel he'll die or go completely insane. Um, it's not a pleasure anymore. It's a must to barely feel normal. And so how do you get from a neuron to a behavior as self-destructive and complicated as alcoholism and addiction? Well, that's where we use a reductionist approach, which to me is the only way that I personally can make sense of this and help other people make sense of what this is. And reductionism is used to understand complex systems, and it does so by exploring its elements and the interactions among their elements, and that is exactly what how we approach substance use disorder. Now it says a complex system is nothing but the sum of its parts. Not exactly true um, at all, actually, but it certainly is, in my opinion, a heck of a lot more accurate way to help people understand what's going on inside their brains, inside their minds. That a reductionist approach is as accurate as current science allows, meaning that I can tell people here that we deal only with the facts, uh, with what really good science has shown us that is the truth. Um, and there is no one overarching missing root cause. It's a sum of a whole bunch of things put together. And I will acknowledge, in terms of reductionist theory, what we do potentially lose out is that, well, maybe the sum of the elements is produces outputs that's greater than all the parts together, meaning we've missed some synergies, etc. But I would say likely. We're still working on that. But the beauty of it is, in terms of something, say, 10 years ago, unfortunately, too much today um, in the recovery world, and certainly 20 years ago, uh, breaking addiction into its individual elements actually brings some substance to what's going on. It's saying this is real. This is not you're cursed for life. You're that piece of spiritual terribleness that you inherited from lifetimes ago or what have you. No, this is real. It's in the brain. We can see it. We'll show it to you. We'll describe it to you, and we'll talk about how it affects you. And it brings some clarity to things that people, for the first time, uh, get. It's like, whoa, this is real. Um, and as well, it doesn't carry that burden of a forever mental disease. Therefore, we bring hope to the picture. This is not something that people cannot recover from. Again, Dr. Kelly in his talks has said that at the 5-year point, a person who's abstinent from substances that was formerly addicted, at the 5-year point, that person statistically has no greater chance of becoming addicted again than anybody else in the rest of the population, meaning it's over, meaning something's happened. And I feel that that's a tremendous message of hope. And the hope lies in, I remember when this first came out, and I think it was about 2001. This whole concept of neuroplasticity, it was like, whoa, what a concept. Um, Prior to that, our feeling was that the brain was basically hardwired, and so change was possible by shifting circuitry uh, from basically one railway track, switch over to another track, and you'll have a different behavior. But the old track's still going to be there. You just need to work on building that new track. But the old one's always going to pull you back. You're hardwired, basically, after age 20, 25. Where in fact, neuroplasticity, thank God, there is hope on that basis because neuroplasticity is real. Addiction happens through neuroplasticity, meaning adaptation to life circumstances, environment, genes, and then substances. And here's the great news: neuroplasticity implies you can change back, potentially better than ever. And so we go through this in as much detail as people can take, because we find the more that we can provide, the better. The majority of our clients are absolutely fascinated to know what's going on, and we can do things that couldn't be done, say, 20 years ago, because the imaging just plain wasn't there. As a for instance, on this slide, we see um, a normal subject 1 month after cocaine use. Oh, there's something in the brain that's turning down. This is real. 4 months after cocaine use, even more so, things are starting to shrink. This is important. It's so much better than this is your brain on drugs and someone cracks an egg and puts it in a frying pan to try and scare people like they used to do. I mean, that stuff is just awful. This is real. There's no scare tactics involved. And moreover, with our clients, we can explain more than, ooh, look at this interesting brain scan 4 months after cocaine use. We can actually go through in detail, and our clients will understand, well, that's part of the reward system that is blunting in reaction to prolonged cocaine use, meaning the brain is adapting to cocaine use. And in so doing, one of the things it's doing is it is pulling back its dopamine receptors in the mesolimbic pathway, particularly. And so on scan, on specialized scan, we can see D2 receptors, they're basically starting to dim out, meaning tolerance, more of the same substance required to get the same dopamine spike, to get that same feel good. And that is one of the major criteria of addiction and dependency, but here we'll speak to addiction only. And as well, we'll find that in terms of drawing simple diagrams and some not so simple, as shown in the slide next to it, that we can actually show what's going on at a neuronal molecular basis and describe, and in my opinion, give rational proof that genetics are involved here, because to produce some of the neuroadaptations um, in addiction, specific genetic input is required to make the proteins or to make the enzymes, what have you, to create those neuroadaptations. One of the things I tell clients here is nothing in this system happens by magic. There's no magic involved in this stuff in terms of what we teach. If we don't have the answer, it means I'm saying in 10 years, well, maybe no. But right now, we know this stuff, and the scientific papers back it entirely. The real, one of the major obstacles that we have to it is really the old school thinking that is still today's school, which is the chronic disease. Even the talks that we see now are, the fancy neuroscience stuff is out there, and the solution is, well, go to AA. Or it doesn't. I believe we're one of the few places that pull together neuroscience with recovery science, and certainly 12-step groups can be a part of it, but not mandatory. Um, we describe addiction and alcoholism as a series of neuroadaptations over various periods of time in a person's life, meaning it's a developmental disorder that has no one single root cause. Quit blaming your parents. Quit blaming your stepfather. Quit blaming your uncle. Quit blaming, sure, did they have a role in it? Absolutely. But throughout the developmental of the brain, particularly up to age 25, other influences like the education system, society at large, um, the general rules under which we live, what are considered norms, what is considered the right thing. All of these sorts of things impact huge. I mean, I think, personally, being accelerated through the school system and not hitting puberty till grade 11 meant that, I mean, socially, I was 2 years behind everybody for the entirety of my public school education. Now, how devastating would that be? You don't even know it, and that's the trouble. And with the, you know, the trauma version of that's out there in terms of it's all about childhood trauma. Well, childhood trauma, yes, is a piece of the puzzle, but childhood trauma can be arrested and things can change, um, depending. But there are specific pieces in the lifespan where you'll see in the Mousetrap game. I remember this came out in 1966. Every kid on the street had to have it. It was awesome. And you put these little pieces together, one by one by one by one, and then you drop a ball, and it goes winding around this intricate maze, and then it's a trap. To me, that is so much like addiction, because at the end of the day, people are trapped by the substances without the ability to quit on their own. And what happens is all these pieces within the limbic system primarily adapt over time to create the perfect trap called addiction, alcoholism, substance use disorder. For those of people who've lived it, it is about as tough a battle as life can possibly present. Um, Again, neuroplasticity means that you can take the mousetrap apart and be done with it. This can be a life experience, not a life sentence. And I think of some of the younger people we have in here who are, 23, 24, 25, even early 30s. Man, they got a whole life to live. Now, logic will tell me, and experience, that these folks are not going to be at AA 10 years from now. Something's going to change, something's going to happen. And most of the time, they're going to be okay. They'll have found a way out. And the treatment industry does not tell people that. It may be one awful, painful way out, but there is a way out. I believe we just accelerate what the brain and the person truly inside wants to do. I think we're an accelerator of the process, rather than a complete uh, uh, new experience. So, scientific paper without a whole lot of evidence behind it, but it's a perfect fit. And that's a Cascade model of the development of substance use onset. Beautiful paper in terms of describing from in utero to infancy to early childhood to adolescence to teens to emerging adults, what's happening at each of those stages from a socio-environmental perspective. Super interesting piece from psychology that we look at with uh, considerable detail and model as a piece of our education for folks here, to break their lives up into what happened in these segments, what happened in these segments of your life, because as well as the Cascade says, the Cascade model says that if you have these circumstances, adverse circumstances here, and then you fall into the next, then they'll get a bit worse if you still have bad circumstances, which will then lead to the next cascade, and on you go. So in terms of interventions, from a sociocultural environmental point of view, the Cascade model is fantastic. And superimposed on neurodevelopment, particularly of the limbic system, which various nuclei are maturing or developing at different stages from conception to age 25 or 30. The Cascade model put together with developmental neuroscience is nearly a perfect fit in terms of understanding cause, effect, more cause, more effect leading to. And so we speak of that in considerable length. I tell people here that, you know, it's not a matter of getting to that horrible secret that you never wanted to tell anybody. That's old school. This truly is about understanding how your brain developed such that you became dependent and addicted. And we start right at the very level of the neuron itself, the primary uh, element in information transfer, in decision making, in all sorts of things to do with the brain. We start at the basic neuron, the dopamine neuron to be exact, and we go through. There are six and actually seven specific neuroadaptations that we talk about in terms of how the neuron reacts under certain conditions over the lifespan, and understanding how it changes and how it can change back is a really good way to demonstrate neuroplasticity. And it also explains many of the very fundamentals of addiction, such as tolerance, meaning downregulation of some parts, upregulation of others at the level of the neuron, changes one's physiological response to substance. Excuse me. And from there, we go into how decisions are made. Different types of neurons, neurons that are associated, or neurons and neurotransmitters that are associated with decision making, with memory, with learning. And we demystify it to the best of our abilities. We talk about the major ones. We talk about dopamine as primary excitatory. We talk about glutamate, super important in learning. We'll speak of GABA. We'll speak of serotonin. We'll also speak of some of the more neuroendocrine pieces, as well as the catecholamines and cortisol, particularly, that are involved in neural networks and decision making and perceptions, thoughts. What's reality? Why is reality altered? I mean, it is, everyone has their own reality, their own perception, to an extent, but in terms of addictions, that reality can be very, very, very distorted. Where's that coming from? That's what we'll get into at the level of neural networks, and followed by functional anatomy of the limbic system, which I tell clients, we all tell clients that in terms of learning about addiction, we tell our students that the fundamental of addiction lives in the limbic system, and it's in the development of the limbic system from in utero to age 25, and the neuroadaptations that take place prior to substance use, because I believe that significant neuroadaptations, particularly prefrontal cortex, uh, occur in the future to be addicted limbic system. But we talk about the neuroadaptations that cause that hijacking of the brain. As well, we get into the communications. Each piece of the limbic system communicates with each other, and as well to the cortex. So we'll speak about how such things as catastrophic thinking, where does that come from? Why does an abnormal amygdala and hyperreactivity with corresponding um, communications with the hippocampus cause drastic thinking, black and white stuff, all kinds of thought patterns, decisions, and behaviors that are arising from these neuroadaptations. And it's important that we get people to be able to delineate um, the disordered thinking, where the thinking is going wrong, where all of a sudden, instead of a firecracker going off, it becomes a keg of dynamite, where in fact, it was really just a firecracker. The disease would say it's a keg of dynamite. So the distortions in thinking, I really try to make those apparent to people through our educational process so that they can come to terms with them. And as I said a while back, coming to terms with them means they see the problem for real for the first time. And without an understanding of what this truly is from a functional neuroscience and neuroanatomic perspective combined with behavior, um, I just don't see any other way of bringing the reality of what is going on to people so that they can actually restore choice in their life. I tell people that, we're going to give you enough material that you will have the choice. The choice won't be made by your subconscious. You will have, just in the time of learning about it and some good exercise and activities, neuroadaptation will have started. Um, you'll know it. You'll be able to know when it's the disorder and when it's the healthy you, that is going to emerge once the disorder gets out of the way. We also, and finally, and this is new, this is really, I would say, only in the last 5 years have I been seeing much in terms of the literature, in terms of the recovery of the science of recovery. So the science of recovery, the papers that have come out in the last 5 years and are coming out every couple of months, have given some uh, considerable insight into how to facilitate healthy neuroplastic change, meaning how to accelerate healing. The major one there being the science of stress and what that does to the brain, the limbic system, that is trying to get out of the hijacked state permanently. How stress is, without question, the number one cause for relapse. Stress meaning, the stress I'm speaking of means physiological change or response going on internally. It's the internal response that is super important. Of course, changing one's world circumstances can be extremely important. Other times, it's just tweaking. It all depends on who the person is, but reducing what is termed allostatic load is absolutely, at this point in time, considered to be the key to recovery. And the brain does recover. And we can speed recovery along. We give a template, meaning an outline of how to make healthy decisions so that they're good for you and they're good for everybody else. There's actually some awesome material on that through game theory. And so these are the things we do. Reach out if anyone feels like it. Just Google TEDS on Chapel, and you'll find a phone number, email if you wish further information. We'd love to hear from you. We're new. It's exciting. Our outcomes are absolutely phenomenal. And I'm talking about the outcomes of people doing complete life turnarounds, 6 to 8 to 9, 10 months from being here. We try and launch people into recovery, not hold them back. And yeah, with that, I'll close. And again, thanks to my partners in this venture, and more to come in the future.